You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
Welcome back to the Horse HealthCast. I'm Jenna Vosgarden, Manager of Digital Marketing for SmartPack.
And I'm Ashley LeCompte-Blazich, Head of R&D for SmartPack. And today we are embarking on a fun little 4-part series, all focused on summer heat and safety.
Absolutely. So over the course of the next 2 months, we're going to be talking about everything from summer heat to UV exposure to heat-related conditions and more. Because I don't know about everywhere across the U.S. right now, but in New England, it is just finally starting to heat up, and it's certainly not going to get any cooler for a long time.
Yeah, it is definitely hot here too, and I am already busting out my Piper Sun shirts and turning our fans on, so let's talk about it.
Smart solutions, trusted voices. Your source for equine health and wellness. This is Horse HealthCast by Smart Equine. The discussions in this podcast are intended for educational and informational purposes and are not intended as veterinary advice. You should always consult with a licensed veterinarian or qualified equine health professional before making changes to your horse's diet or care plan. Hosts and guests cannot guarantee the reliability, accuracy, or completeness of the information shared, and as such, these discussions are not a substitute for veterinarian or professional guidance, and any actions you take are at your own risk. Products discussed on this podcast are not endorsed by Smart Equine and are not intended to treat, diagnose, or cure any medical issue.
Okay, so I feel like as a horse person, I've always been taught that sweating is a very important part of your horse staying healthy and cool and stuff. And as a human, I know that, I'm going to say theoretically because I'm not a science person. Theoretically, when you sweat, it evaporates and that helps cool you. Is that kind of the basics of it? Is there more to it you can explain?
Yeah. So that's definitely the basics of it. So a super fun fact is that evaporative cooling is actually not a great mechanism for most mammals. Most mammals have relatively dense hair coats, and evaporation requires that air reaches that moisture in order to cool them, right? So dogs pant. Dogs do have a little bit of evaporative cooling on their noses and their paws, but they don't rely on sweating to cool them down. Elephants flap their ears, pigs roll in mud. Every different type of mammal has their mechanism for staying cool. Horses and humans are two of the only mammals that use sweating as the primary mechanism of cooling their body and maintaining their body temperature, which I think is just so cool. Maybe that explains why we have such kindred spirits to our horses. Who knows?
We know what it is to be sweaty and miserable and doing our best.
That's right. And sweaty and miserable is something, but unsweaty and miserable is even worse, right? So, and we'll get into that, I think, a little bit deeper into the episode. But yeah, evaporation is the primary way that horses are going to be, and humans are going to be, regulating our body temperature. So when warm, dry air passes over a water saturated surface, such as a horse that has just been hosed off or a horse that is, in a foamy lather of sweat, that water absorbs the heat from the air and turns it into gas. And that natural reaction draws the heat out, producing the cool surface. And that's how that mechanism works. And horse sweat, unlike our sweat, it would be real weird if we got foamy, but horses, whenever you see a horse in what we would call a white lather, right? There's a unique protein in their sweat called latherin that creates that foam and actually allows the sweat to spread more easily around their body. Because horses have a disadvantageous ratio of body surface. Right? So their surface area, they have a lower surface area to mass ratio. So their body is so much larger relative to the skin surface area. And because there's less surface area for that evaporation to be occurring, it makes it less efficient to dissipate that heat.
So you're saying that for the size of the horse, they actually don't have an appropriate amount of skin to allow enough evaporation.
That's a weird way of putting it, but something like that, yes. Yeah, their surface area is just, and same with babies, right? Human babies, they overheat faster because they just don't have as much surface area as an adult human, and the same would go for a horse. So their mass to surface area ratio, think about 1,500 pounds and then, or 100 pounds, and how much surface area they have. Sometimes it can be relatively inefficient. So fewer opportunities to dissipate that core body heat.
Yeah, I've never stood next to my 16-3 gelding and been wow, you are a disadvantage.
You need more skin.
Sweat. You need more skin and more surface area. What an interesting, that's such a cool thought though.
Yeah, You'll never look at them the same now.
No, truly. So when we're looking at horses and we're seeing like the normal sweating patterns, so like under the saddle when we ride, behind the ears of the bridle or the halter, like even a little bit, or maybe a lot, depending on what you're working on their flanks, or if you have like protective wear on their legs, like all of that is considered normal, including a white lather. Like all of that is considered within normal range of their sweating.
Yeah, absolutely. White lather, depending on what your horse is doing and what type of equipment they're wearing. White lather underneath a saddle pad, white lather between the butt cheeks. White lather is totally normal. It's just that protein helping that sweat to move throughout their body. And so nothing to be concerned about there. Obviously, they need a bath. They're really if they get to the point where that latherin is really doing its job and you see quite a bit of foam, they're very hot and their body is doing its job to try to dissipate that core heat. So definitely they could use a bath in that scenario, but there's nothing, irregular or unnatural about that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I always felt like I consider myself a very good sweater. Like it is warm outside, therefore my body is, no matter what the temperature is inside, I am probably producing sweat. My body's just aware that it's hot out. And I always felt like my horse was the same, where we would walk out to our summer lesson and he and I would already look like we've done, half a mile of trot sets, and other people's horses were like cool throughout most of the lesson until they'd put in, a decent amount of work over fences. Like, is there a difference in how much a horse sweats and how much better or worse that is? And we're going to talk about not sweating at all, but I mean, just like a difference in sweating in general. Is that a sign of anything?
Horse dependent.
Okay.
In fitter horses, skeletal muscle makes up, 50% or more of their body weight. And, engaging so much muscle mass during strenuous activity can create a tremendous amount of heat. So it certainly is horse dependent. Then you also have horses that are maybe a little bit higher on the body condition score, scale.
Well-groceryed, as we
as we have endearingly come to call them. And that excess body fat helps to retain a little, well, not really helping, right? I guess it's disadvantageous in the summer. But that excess body fat retains a little bit of heat. So I think that, it's certainly just like people, horses can vary in how they react to different heat. It also could be something related to acclimation to the weather as it's changing. If you've had a very cool spring and then suddenly it gets really hot, some horses react to that differently and it takes a little bit of time for them to adjust. But yeah, I think some horses are probably just better sweaters than others just by nature.
Good for them. Good for them.
That's right.
I feel like with that, like we're very used to, like you said earlier, the concept of like a dog panting, like a cat panting, not great. A human panting, fairly normal. A horse, we're used to them, like we would always call it blowing it out after a lesson when they were like really sucking some wind for a minute. But like that's also something where like there's regular to irregular levels of it. But I feel like there's also something to do with that you had talked about or put into the notes and how it relates to sweating. Is that right?
I mean, paying attention to your horse's respiration can give you a lot of information. So whether it relates to how they're recovering from aerobic exercise or how they're handling the environment or the task that they're being asked to do. When a horse runs, their breathing is coupled to their strides, right? So 1 breath per stride. And as a result of that, they cannot significantly increase their respiration to help blow off that excess heat the way some other mammals can. So that certainly puts them at a disadvantage as well. So they really do rely on sweating. Like I said, humans and horses rely on sweating as their core, their principal manner of reducing their body heat when they are in work in the summertime. So it is so important that we pay attention to the sweating, that we do our best in horses that struggle to sweat to keep them wet, because that evaporative cooling can happen whether it's sweat or water, right? It just requires a wet surface. And then there are like a lot of factors that go into what makes that evaporative cooling process better or worse. One of them is like humidity. So if the air is already saturated in moisture, so we know that on a humid day, by nature, that means that there is quite a bit of moisture in the air. That's why it feels like you're like sitting in a sauna or I guess a steam room. Yeah. But if the air already contains a lot of moisture, then there's really no dryness in the air to suck that water. And so, yeah, I mean, it is so important that you have those water molecules on the body, whether it's latherin and sweat, whether it is a hose of water, that water needs to be on the body in order to evaporate it. And if it's really humid outside, there's already enough water in the air. The horses are really going to struggle to cool off in that type of environment. So this is why it's really important when you look at like the heat index. I think actually on our website, we might have like is it too hot to ride
We sure do.
And it'll tell you humidity plays a part in this. So if it is 90 degrees and you live in Arizona and it is dry as a bone outside, it's going to be a very different situation than if it's 80 degrees with, 80% humidity or whatever. And your horse is going to struggle to cool off more in a high humid environment, even if it is not as hot as it was, in a very dry environment. So that the humidity is something to really, really pay attention to.
That's so interesting. I feel like I've always had the mentality of if it's warm or hot, or your horse is warm or hot and it's, spring, summer, hose them off after a ride, let them cool, let them dry. And I always just made the one-to-one of, sure, cool water on a warm horse cools them down, but it's mostly the evaporation you're saying that really is playing the biggest factor in why we would add more water to allow them to cool off.
I mean, cold water certainly helps, right? Like,
it's not going to not play a part.
Right. You hose them down with a cold shower, and they're certainly all of that blood flowing up to their skin is now warm blood coming to the skin. The skin is being cooled. The blood is going away a little bit colder. So it's certainly circulating through their body, helping to cool them down. However, I am not a sweat scraper. I mean, I will if I have to, but
I was going to ask, but I feel like that's such a hot button topic.
I know. I mean, I think this is one where the humidity definitely plays into effect, because if it's a super humid day and you choose not to sweat scrape, like, you're really not helping them out that much. But if it's a nice dry day and you have a really nice breeze, keeping them very wet is going to extend the time that evaporative cooling is taking place. So I typically will not sweat scrape, although every time I don't, he rolls almost immediately. And I don't know if that's like his way of like scraping it off himself. I don't know. So like if I'm at a horse show, I will usually sweat scrape because I'm like trying to protect the braids and I don't want him to roll. But yeah, oftentimes I just let him drip dry and kind of extend the life of that evaporation. And if you have a nice breeze and it's a dry day, it's certainly going to help cool them off.
Yeah. So all of my friends here in New England, keep that in mind, the dry day part, because for the most part, I feel like in the summer, I step outside and I feel like I have entered a bathhouse. So maybe for us, it does not work the same on those days.
That's right. So there are other things to consider. So right now, it feels like a bathhouse here in Chicago too. Ugh. So when you can't control the humidity, which I'm not Mother Nature, so I certainly can't. But when humidity is at play and you have quite a bit of moisture in the air, there are other things that you can consider to help your horse fight against the hot weather. The first is their coat. So some horses, especially as they age, they may be struggling with Cushing's or, retaining a winter coat. And, even I've seen a couple, we had a few days this spring where it became like 85 degrees out of nowhere and the horses hadn't blown their coat yet. So in scenarios like that, considering their coats, like do they need to have a little haircut? Do we need to help them out with a little trace cut to give their vital organ, the places where their vital organs are, a little bit more of an opportunity to get that water contact right with the skin, allow for that evaporation?
Yeah, and I know a lot of horses do slick out beautifully by midsummer, but it's definitely worth keeping in mind that if you're working your horse pretty intensely or even moderately early summer, it might help them to have a clip earlier. And I know nobody likes being covered in hair for the next 3 to 7 business years, but if you want to help your horse cool off and feel a little bit faster, it might be worth considering, at least for maybe not this summer since it's already June, but maybe for next summer, clipping earlier if you're going to be working them a bit more.
Yeah, I did a trace cut. Well, I didn't do anything. I outsourced, but my trainer, my wonderful trainer did a trace clip on Andy in like the beginning.
Shout out Meredith, as always.
I know. What would I do without her? And yeah, he's been doing really well with all of his conditioning work. And that's my next point is conditioning. Yep. So obviously setting your horse up for success when you're talking about respiratory conditioning and cardiovascular conditioning, the more fit they are, the more they're able to tolerate the circumstances of their training. So what I see a lot of is people getting really excited. Owning a boarding barn, you see a little bit of everybody, right? And people get real excited that first nice day in spring or summer where they're like, oh my gosh, the sun is out. I'm going to go for a nice long trail ride. And they come home and the horse is just drenched, so exhausted. And because they went from 0 to 100 overnight in one day. Yeah. So considering your horse's conditioning and the tasks that they're being asked to do, obviously is a huge piece of this. Acclimation to geographic location. So if you are somebody who is moving across the country from an arid climate to Florida, where it feels like you're, living inside of a hot car all day, like you have to consider your horse's system, needs a little bit of time to acclimate before you ask them to have to enter into rigorous work.
Yeah. And I know we talked a little bit a couple episodes ago during the Kentucky 3-day time about what conditioning looks like and what you do with your horses and what people can do with their horses. So again, I know it's going to be, it is June. And so it's going to be that a lot of people have already been riding and been riding consistently. But if that's something that you are interested in, either if you're still legging up or if you're thinking about it for next year, definitely would recommend going and listening to that and then just thinking about that a little bit more. Like if you were somebody who would hit 75 degrees and you're like, hell yeah, let's go for a can.
Yeah.
One, I feel you. But two, maybe just think about that for next year in case your horse did come back a little pooped and a little sweatier than you had anticipated.
Yeah. I mean, and the way that I do it, and not to, throw us off into a tangent, but I start off with doing trot sets. And I have a planned out time, whether it's 4 minutes of trotting, 1 minute of walking. And then I measure respiration and try to see how long it takes him to come back to resting, just to see where he's at on that scale. And then I just extend that a little bit each day or each conditioning day. And we add hills. And so definitely you have to start off slow, add more to see how your horse tolerates it. And then, of course, over the span of a summer, your horses can become really fit. And then they're obviously going to have a much higher tolerance to these things. But obviously, fit horses are going to respond to the hot weather, or horses that are trained in hot weather are going to respond to hot weather better. So
yeah, it's a worthwhile tangent, I think. And for anybody, I come to the hunter jumper world, we did not ever track anything on a watch besides how long it was until our next class at a horse show. But I do think that, if when I get back into riding, it's something that I would be doing. I would be trying to just know what my horse's regular respiratory rate is, just so I can be aware of that a little bit better. Because a lot of times I would go on vibes and my vibes would change from day to day, but his respiratory rate probably didn't. And I probably should have gone off of that. So I don't know. I think it's still worth keeping in mind and learning from other disciplines and what they do at all times.
Yeah, absolutely. There's wearables and apps out there for that, which we can get into a tangent another time on all the hard good stuff that we can use during our training. But and I think we touched on it a little bit earlier too, is just the state of the horse, whether it's their hair coat or their body condition, making sure that you're asking fair tasks of your horse. If your horse is a little bit overweight or if your horse is even a little bit underweight, ensuring that they are set up for success with what's ahead of them. So a horse with excess body heat is going to retain, or excess body fat, they're going to retain more heat. They're going to have a much harder time with general tasks, right? Even just going for a walk or a trot in the heat is going to be so much harder on them. So, keeping that in mind as well is important. And then the last point that I will go on here is ensuring that their electrolyte balance is intact. So the electrolytes we know are lost through sweat. So the more your horse sweats, the more they're going to need to replenish those electrolytes, just like you and me. If we're out and marathon training, having electrolyte water or a sports drink like Gatorade or something like that to help replenish those electrolytes. Same thing is going to happen with the horses. And when we have an imbalance of those minerals, it can impair nerve and muscular function, which just kind of sends the flywheel in a very negative direction, impacts thermoregulation. So dehydration certainly limits a horse's ability to produce sweat. We know that too. So keeping your horse very well hydrated and keeping their electrolyte balance optimal is probably one of the best things that you can do for a horse. We can't control the humidity. So making sure that they are well hydrated and that they have proper electrolytes, whether that's a free choice salt lick with trace minerals, or if you're adding a salt supplement or electrolyte supplement to their feed bin, that is something really easy that you can add to your regimen that can help them quite a bit.
Yeah. And we've got a decent amount to cover this episode, so I won't go too heavily into what to use, but as really quick shout outs, we've talked about it before, but Gallagher's water is a really great additive that a lot of horses really, really love in their water to help encourage them to drink. Some folks, like you mentioned, will actually put Gatorade in their horse's water. There's buckets that have the silver lining that can really help encourage drinking. We obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but hopefully obviously, we have our own supplement line. And one of those is Smart Lights, powder or pellets. We have a lot of pro riders that really love and swear by those. And we carry a bunch of other ones like Apple a Day and Summer Games and Restore and other Stress Decks. There's a ton on the website. So if you're looking for a place to start with electrolytes or water additives, we definitely have some good ones available for you. And I'll shout out our customer care really quick. If you're not sure where to start with any of that, we have a whole team of horse people. They'd love to talk to you. The number's on the website, but you can also just give them a quick call anytime, 1-800-461-8898. And that will be my product soapbox really quick. So we have other things to get through, but always worth taking a look at that if you guys have any interest in adding to what your horse's regimen currently looks like or exploring other ways to help encourage drinking and electrolyte balances and things like that. So that's that soapbox.
Love that. Great soapbox.
Nailed it. So we talked a lot about sweating and like when it's normal and what it looks like and what you can do to help with it. But then there's also, you had kind of steered us towards the beginning. There's also what happens when sweating is, a concern. So there's excessive sweating, but then there's also lack of sweating. So not sure which direction you want to go first, but gotta touch on those too.
I think we should dive into the lack of sweating. So
let's do it.
Awesome. So in a scenario where an animal whose primary method of cooling is sweating and they're not sweating, you can see how this would present
This feels like a problem. Yeah.
This is a problem.
We're missing something.
So in this scenario, we would call this equine anhidrosis. So when a horse loses their ability to sweat, it severely impacts their ability to regulate their body temperature. Very bad.
Makes sense.
We do not want this at all. So the bummer of all this is that science hasn't really quite decided why anhidrosis happens.
Really?
Which is fixing it so challenging. Yeah, there's a lot of theories out there that are backed by like pretty decent science, but we've not really been able to pinpoint it.
Always thought that it was if you took a horse from one geographical location to the other, there was like the increased risk of them having anhidrosis as an issue, but that's not like a proven scientific thing.
That does increase the risk.
Okay.
And then moving them back to cooler climates can help that horse because there really is no cure for anhidrosis, but that is not what causes it.
Interesting. Okay.
It has not been proven to be what causes it. So there are some studies out there that have linked genetic predispositions from various breeds. Some have hypothesized that it is the chronic stress on sweat glands from overstimulation in very, very hot climates causes those glands to atrophy. So they kind of burn out. A very popular theory is that endocrine disorders like PPID, Cushing's, they can be associated with the onset. And so there's a lot of theories out there. And a lot of these are backed by science, but remember, correlation doesn't always mean causation. So I think it's been very challenging for us to pinpoint exactly what causes anhidrosis, which of course then makes it so much harder to manage anhidrosis. So yeah, things to look out for if you think that your horse is not sweating appropriately is a dry coat, right? If you come back from a pretty hard, hefty workout in heat and your horse is not sweating, that is concerning. Rapid labored breathing, flaring nostrils. Like clearly they're having a really hard time dissipating that heat. They're having a hard time catching their breath. So that relates to elevated body temperature, elevated heart rate, lethargy, decreased appetite, poor performance. Like they're just struggling. They're having a really hard time. And then, but that can all be other things, right? That could just mean that you have a fat, out of shape horse. But your fat, out of shape horse is going to sweat. So that is something to look for, is that dry coat. And in those areas where the coat stays really dry, you might see some flaky skin. You might see some localized hair loss. If you Google this, like there's some really great images out there that can show you exactly what you're looking for. But really, you're looking for a dry coat after heavy exercise. Like that is the one very specific thing. All the other things that I talked about, rapid labored breathing, I experienced that after I ran. Right? So like that is not specific to anhidrosis. Elevated body temperature and heart rate are not specific to anhidrosis. That can just be an unfit horse being asked to do a task they were not ready for. However, if they come back from that task and they are not sweating, we are waving the red flag.
Yeah. It's one of those where because it can happen, like it might happen when you change climates, but it could just happen. Like it's something that you should just kind of be keeping an eye out for at all times, right? Like you can have a horse for 8-9 years, know everything about them, their whole history and their whole life, and it could still happen because we just don't 100% know why it happens.
Yep. I have a local friend who has an off-track thoroughbred. And I was with her at Indiana one year at a show, and they were like pouring buckets of water over him in cross country because he hadn't been sweating very randomly. And now granted, again, hard to diagnose and it because we just don't know enough about it. But yes, I mean, sometimes there can just be no rhyme or reason.
That's crazy. So yeah, always keeping an eye out for the signs. We say it every episode, knowing your horse, paying attention to your horse.
Right. That's right. Absolutely. And just to put a number on it, approximately 70% of the body heat of a horse is lost through evaporation. So non-sweaters are at a massive risk for heat stroke. It is more prevalent in hot, humid climates, but this can happen anywhere. So if this is happening to your horse, you certainly need to work with your veterinarian to come up with a solution.
It's not just, oh shoot, my horse isn't sweating. It's, oh shoot, my horse is at risk for heat stroke.
Yes. Yep. So the diagnostics that they'll do. So if you do think, okay, my horse is having a sweating problem, we're not quite sure why, but I came home from a gallop and like my saddle pad wasn't even wet and that feels very strange, you call your vet right away. Always call your vets, and do not jump right to like, I'm going to go online and someone's going to tell you, call your vet. Your veterinarian is going to come put hands on your horse and they're going to be able to give you a lot more information than your favorite podcasters will, right? The first thing they're probably going to do is like a sweat test. So they're going to inject a small diluted amount of a sweat stimulating medication, sometimes like epinephrine, and they'll put that between the layers of the horse's skin. And then they're going to wait, because that should make the horse sweat. So they should have like a little localized patch of sweat within 15, 20 minutes or so. An anhidrotic horse would produce little to no sweat in that area. So that gives them a very visual, clear-cut assessment of like, is this horse responding to stimulus? Like, is this horse's body going to sweat? So, and then sometimes I think they can actually, and I'm not a vet, so don't quote me here, but I think they actually can compare like the exact amount of sweat produced in some capacity to put like a quantitative metric on it so that it can be measured.
So cool.
So your vet certainly can help you out here. So you have your vet out and your vet says, yes, your horse has anhidrosis. Now what? Now we move into management strategies. What can I do to help my horse? And, obviously, the best thing that you can do for your horse is to keep them in like shady areas with a lot of airflow, and consider putting them out overnight instead of having them stand in the sun all day. Putting them in a turnout area that has a run-in with a fan so that they're not standing in direct sunlight. Clipping them, even if they don't have a dense hair coat, just to help get that water and any sweat that they are producing as close to the skin as possible. And then, of course, like using cooling techniques. I just mentioned how that one eventer had like a whole pit crew, with buckets and buckets of water pouring it on the horse. So if they can't produce that water themselves, obviously water is not going to contain the latherine to help, disperse that sweat throughout the body, but any water is good water. So putting water on your horse, hosing them off consistently, trying to keep them as wet as possible to encourage that evaporation is something that you can do that really helps.
And I would imagine too, like you said, with turnout, if you can time your rides to cooler or shadier parts of the day, or even in the evening or very early morning, your horse is going to feel a lot better off for only being worked lightly and in those times if possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a big one. And you had mentioned before, like with exercise and with all that, I'm sure monitoring recovery rates. So if you have an anhidrosis horse and you know that they're going to be breathing harder because they're compensating, just keeping an eye on that and knowing. So even if you're not an eventer, having a watch and having a respiratory check and a number in your head to keep an eye on or an ear out for is a really big one for sure. And we talked a little bit too about other like support options outside of management. Like the management is huge. We know that management controls so much of how a horse really does exist and thrive. So like always going to management first. But then once you've done that, the support options, like we talked about with hydration management and like supplements and things like that. There was one that I wanted to call out really quick that I didn't in the beginning because we don't carry it. It's not one of our products, but I don't know. It's interesting. They're patches. I think it's called EquiWinner, and they're a patch that you put on your horse, like on their hindquarters. It's like a 10-day patch that you put on one every day, and it helps encourage your horse's electrolyte balance. I don't know a ton about it. It's not one that we've used, but I was talking to a trainer and a pro who uses it for one of their horses that has anhidrosis, and she said that he does great on it. So worth looking into if you're looking for other management strategies besides like the supplements that we had talked about earlier.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I've never heard of that before, but
yeah, me neither.
I don't have a horse with anhidrosis either. So I've never been, as we would say, up a creek without a paddle. If you're in that situation, obviously consult your veterinarian. But because there's really no cure for this and all of it comes down to management, trying anything that's out there is, worth a shot if you have your veterinarian on board with you. And obviously you're keeping your horse as you're keeping your horse as a number one here. All of these things make your horse comfortable. These things are not so that you can, get back out there and go back to whatever it was that you were doing. This is just, these are attempts to keep your horse comfortable and happy and safe. So yeah, that's a really cool option.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth noting that not every horse with anhidrosis is going to hit the top levels of what you dreamed for them. Like, that's just kind of a tough reality. Same with the horse that has osteoarthritis or roaring or heaves. Like, just not every horse is going to be able to power through whatever they've got going on to keep hitting and performing at the highest level. So it's a tough reality to swallow. Like, no horse person wants to think that their horse can't do something, but also just being really realistic about what's going to be comfortable for your horse long term if you guys are facing this. And if early morning rides for 10 minutes are all you can do, then you're probably not likely to hit every single EC final in the dead of summer kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there also is geographic relocation. So listen, if you are willing to uproot your family and sell your home and move up to Canada or a place that is a little bit chillier year round, obviously that is an option. There is some anecdotal evidence that horses do really well when transported to cooler climates. So, there is a higher prevalence of this, obviously, in hot, humid environments. So moving is always an option. If you really, really love your horse, I will move for you, Andy, if you're listening.
I support anybody who wants to uproot their entire life just so their horse can breathe and sweat better. Like, more power to you. I love you for that.
I will knock on wood that Andy does not have anhidrosis, and we have been very grateful for his wonderful health. But if he did, I would find a way to send him somewhere to see if that would help him. So, there always is obviously relocation in giving them an opportunity to live in a more desirable geographic location for horses that is a little bit cooler. So
to be fair, I know that I'm not meant to live in the South. I am geographically located where I am also going to thrive. So, like, more power to anybody and everybody who can or has to do that.
I am definitely meant for warm. Yeah, I'm definitely meant for the warm. I would rather sweat, but I'm weird in that. I know. And I also live in Florida half the year. So I love being warmer. So Andy would have to go north without me because I certainly
Andy and I can hang out. We can.
I'm not a snow. I'll send him to you, Jenna. That's right.
If we ever come to that bridge, the bridge can lead right to my house.
I love that for us. We'll I think that this is a great plan.
Anybody out there who also needs to have a backup plan, just find a friend who lives north and plan to offload them into their yard. It'll be fine. It'll be fine.
Yeah, I love that. So, I mean, there are obviously that is an option. These patches sound kind of cool and promising. I cannot really say much to them because I've never heard of them before. But listen, any given Sunday, I guess, right? So if you're in a position to try something new, it's certainly an option. There are people who swear by 1AC.
Yep.
ESF 100 is a great product. Guinness beer. There are people out there that swear. I give my horse a Guinness beer every night. And, I think that there's no one really knows why it works, but some people swear that it does. And I think some theories are that like the trace amount of alcohol in beer is a vasodilator, which helps their circulation. So I think there's a lot of theories in there, but nobody really knows why.
I have friends in the polo world that swear by a beer for every pony before the end of the day.
And people say that it works. So, yeah. I mean,
it's only weird if it doesn't work is kind of my line.
That's right. If you're feeding your horse beer for no reason, then it's weird. But if it's working, what is that phrase that if it's dumb and it works, then it's not dumb. So
I love that.
Yeah.
So I think from everything we've talked about here, I mean, key takeaways. One is the one that you and I will repeat until kingdom come, and just know your horse is normal. Like, just be aware of what is normal sweating for your horse, what is normal breathing. Even if you don't know, by the second, just be kind of aware of how heavy your horse breathes after a regular ride, after a tough ride, and things like that. Just be just know your horse. Be as aware of them as possible because you're going to be sweaty, you're going to be hot, you're going to be breathing hard, but your horse can't monitor you. That's not something they're capable of. You are capable of monitoring your horse while also being a little bit sweaty and miserable. So that's always like my big thing that we say it all the time. And I just think it bears worth repeating all the time.
Yes, I totally agree. Know your horse, monitor changes, just pay attention to what your baseline is. If I could add anything to that, it would be that heat management can be proactive. You don't always have to be reactive. So I mentioned earlier, keeping your horse at a healthy body condition, like making sure that if there is, if they don't have to be carrying around extra fat, then that's the ideal situation, right? They're able to dissipate heat faster if they do not have that insulating layer of adipose tissue. Fantastic. Making sure that you're conditioning them in a way that's advantageous for whatever they're going to be asked to do. So setting them up for success early on in the season. so that they are properly conditioned skeletally, muscularly, cardiovascularly, respiratory, like all of the systems are well oiled and ready to go. So thinking about summer in the spring, even at the end of the winter, making sure that you have a plan to set your horse up for success. So you can, manage all these things ahead of time so that when June, July, August hits and it is hot and humid, you have a plan. You've gone to smartpack.com and you have found our heat and humidity index infographic.
Which we'll plug into the show notes as well, so you can keep it on hand for next year.
You've printed it out and laminated it, and it lives in your barn so that you can decide when to ride and when not to ride. And when it's really hot, you have a plan for what you're going to do for your horse, whether that means adding electrolytes to their diet or Gallagher's water or hosing them off a few times a day. So putting them under a shady tree in their turnout, you have a plan for what your management is going to look like. So being proactive about this instead of waiting until your horse is in this type of predicament and you don't really know what to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really great note to kind of wrap up on this. Today we were obviously, hopefully very specifically, we're talking about sweating and anhidrosis, but this is just part one of our Beat the Heat series. So if you are, planning on a hot, sweaty summer, like most of us, I think across the US are, stay tuned. We've got plenty more coming up with like UV exposure and other heat related things happening. So stick with us for the next couple of weeks and we'll see you on the next one where we talk even more about all the hot, sweaty things that summer can bring.
You can find links to today's products in the show notes on your podcast player or on our website at www.smartpackequine.com/blog.
We are here twice a month on the 15th and the 30th, but in between, find us on Instagram and Facebook at SmartPack or shop online at smartequine or smartpack.com. Until next time, stay smart, stay sweaty, I guess.
And give your horse a cookie from us.